All right, so music, huh? I mean, we all have those songs, those tunes that just, they hit us in a certain way.
Totally. I mean, music can bring back memories, stir up emotions. It's powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff. It really is. But have you ever stopped and actually wondered why that is? Why does music have this hold on us? What is it about these sounds, these notes and rhythms that makes us feel so much?
It's a question that goes deeper than you might think, actually. For centuries, philosophers have been grappling with the very nature of music. Like, what is it beyond just the sounds we hear? And what does it tell us about ourselves, about being human?
It's not just about tapping your foot and enjoying the melody, right? There's a whole philosophical side to it that's been debated for ages.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that before the 19th century, most of the philosophical talk about music was centered on how it connected to words, like in operas or how it imitated sounds from nature. Instrumental music, the kind without singing or a clear story, wasn't really given that much attention.
So instrumental music was almost seen as like the less sophisticated cousin.
Pretty much, yeah. But then, right around the year 1800, things started to change. Big time.
A real turning point. And that's where we're headed today, folks. We're diving into the world of Western philosophy of music since 1800.
So buckle up for a deep dive into some serious musical pondering.
Now, I know philosophy of music might sound a little intimidating to some.
A little heady?
Yeah, a
Yeah.
little heady. But honestly, I promise you this is going to be fascinating. And honestly, it can really change the way you listen to and experience music. It's like getting a secret decoder ring for something you already love.
Think of it this way. We're going to unpack some really complex ideas, but in a way that's hopefully engaging and easy to grasp. No need for a philosophy degree here.
And we're basing this whole deep dive on some really insightful excerpts from the history of Western philosophy of music since 1800, from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Think of it as our super smart guidebook.
Exactly, a guidebook through a world of musical thought.
All right, so let's get this show on the road. Where do we even begin with all this philosophy of music stuff?
Well, I think a great place to start is with what's often called the Romantic Revolution. This was a huge shift in how people thought about art and aesthetics, especially in the early 19th century.
Okay, so when we say romantic, we're not talking about candlelit dinners and love letters.
Not exactly, no. Think less about hearts and flowers and more about a fundamental change in artistic sensibility.
So what was this big change all about?
It was a move away from this idea that art had to imitate nature. Instead, the focus shifted towards the expression of feelings, the autonomy of art for art's sake.
So it was less about, painting a perfect realistic landscape and more about expressing the artist's inner world, their emotions.
Exactly. And some thinkers even believe that art could give us knowledge of a reality beyond what we can see and touch.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So art as a window into something bigger than ourselves.
That's the idea. And one of the key figures in this shift was Wilhelm Heinrich Wackenroth.
Okay, Wackenreiter, got it. What did he have to say?
Well, in his Fantasies on Art for Friends of Art, he made this really interesting comparison between music and painting. He said, look, visual arts, they can try to copy nature, but they'll always fall short.
Because nature is always more beautiful than anything we can create, right?
Exactly. But music, he argued, doesn't try to imitate at all. Instead, it creates its own world.
It's not trying to be a prettier version of a bird singing, for instance. It's doing its own thing entirely.
Right. Music creates a unique reality with its own rules.
It's almost like stepping into a different dimension, just through sound.
Totally. And this idea that music operates in its own realm leads to something called the ineffability thesis.
Okay, the ineffability thesis. That sounds pretty intense.
It's basically the idea that words can't truly capture what music is or what it expresses.
So it's not just that we haven't found the right words yet, it's that music is beyond language altogether.
Precisely. Felix Mendelssohn, the composer, put it beautifully. He said that the thoughts his favorite music expresses are not too indefinite to be put into words, but on the contrary, too definite.
I love that. It's like music is speaking a language that's almost too precise, too nuanced for words to handle.
Exactly. Then you have someone like August Wilhelm Ambros, a music historian. He had a slightly less extreme view. He basically said, It's nearly impossible to find words that truly correspond to musical feelings.
So he's still acknowledging the limitations of language when it comes to music.
Absolutely. But the whole debate about whether we can actually describe music in words is super important. It really pushed thinkers to see music as its own symbolic system, not a failed attempt at language.
Right. Music is its own language with its own grammar and its own power to communicate.
Exactly. It's not just trying to represent something else. It's a unique form of expression in itself.
So we've got this idea that music is its own world, that it speaks its own language. What other big ideas were brewing during this Romantic period?
Well, another really influential idea was the expression theory. This is the view that the emotions we hear in music are directly connected to the emotions the composer felt while writing it.
So like if a composer was feeling super sad when they wrote a piece, the music itself will sound sad.
That's the basic idea. It's like the music is a direct outpouring of their inner emotional state. Wagenrotter actually touches on this too. He tells a story about a fictional composer named Joseph Berglinger who creates this incredibly moving piece of passion music during a time of immense personal suffering.
And the idea is that the music is a direct reflection of his suffering, his emotional turmoil.
Exactly. It's like a sonic window into his soul.
And even Beethoven himself, arguably the ultimate romantic composer, hinted at this connection between feeling and music. He once described how he was driven to turn my feelings into the music that sounds within me and torments me until finally it has been put down in notes on the sheet of paper.
Wow, that's a powerful image, turning raw emotion into musical form.
Right. It's like the music is born from the intensity of the composer's feelings.
And speaking of intensity, we can't talk about the Romantic era's view of music without mentioning E.T.A. Hoffmann.
Okay, Hoffman. Now, he was a writer, a composer, a music critic.
He was all of that and more, a true Renaissance man of the arts. And his essay on Beethoven's instrumental music was like a rallying cry for this new way of thinking about music. He famously said, "When we speak of music as an independent art, should we not always restrict our meaning to instrumental music, which gives pure expression to music's specific nature? It is the most romantic of all the arts. One might almost say the only genuinely romantic one, for its sole subject is the infinite."
He's basically saying instrumental music is where it's at. It's the purest, most romantic form of art because it speaks directly to the infinite.
Exactly. He elevated instrumental music above anything that relied on words or tried to imitate something else.
It's interesting, though, because even while he was making this argument for music's independence, he still used incredibly vivid language to describe instrumental works. He talked about Haydn's music transporting us to vast green woodlands, Mozart's taking us into the heart of the spirit realm. So even though he saw instrumental music as its own thing, he still used these very evocative images to help people connect with it.
Right. Because ultimately, he understood that music, even without a specific story, can evoke powerful feelings and images in the listener.
And Hoffman also had his own take on the ineffability thesis, right? That idea that words can't fully capture music.
Totally. He said, "Music discloses to man an unknown realm, a world that has nothing in common with the external sensual world that surrounds him, a world in which he leaves behind him all definite feelings to surrender himself to an inexpressible longing."
So music is a gateway to a hidden world, a realm of pure feeling and longing that we can't quite grasp with words.
That's how Hoffman saw it. And it was a view that had a huge impact on Romantic thought. So we've seen this real explosion of new ideas in the early 19th century, this emphasis on instrumental music, its ability to express deep emotions, and its connection to something larger than ourselves. But it was Arthur Schopenhauer who tried to give these ideas a more systematic philosophical grounding.
Ah, Schopenhauer. Now we're getting into some serious philosophical territory.
Yeah.
I've heard he had a pretty unique view of music, right?
He did. And to understand it, we need to grasp a bit of his overall philosophy, which, by the way, was pretty intense. He believed that the world, at its core, is driven by this blind, striving force he called will.
The will, what's that all about?
It's this constant urge, this insatiable desire that's behind everything. And because wanting and striving never really end, Schopenhauer saw the world as fundamentally full of suffering.
So, bit of a pessimist, our Schopenhauer.
Well, he definitely wasn't known for his cheery outlook. But here's the thing. He believed that art could offer us a temporary escape from this suffering.
Okay, so art as a refuge from the relentless will.
Exactly. He thought that art, in its various forms, could represent these perfect, eternal blueprints of things. He called them Platonic ideas, which exist outside of time and space. And by contemplating these ideas through art, We could briefly free ourselves from the will's grip.
Interesting. But you mentioned that music held an even more special place for Schopenhauer.
He did, because for him, music wasn't just a representation of these ideas. It was a direct representation of the will itself. He saw music and the fundamental force driving the universe as two sides of the same coin.
Wow, that's a bold claim. So music is like the soundtrack to existence itself.
That's the idea. He even said that music could exist even if the world as we know it disappeared. It's that fundamental.
Mind-blowing.
Right. And he even tried to connect specific musical elements to different levels of the will's manifestation in the world. He linked the range of pitches to these levels, with low pitches representing more basic forces and higher pitches corresponding to more complex beings, including us humans.
So like a low rumble might represent the very basic primal stirrings of the will, while a soaring melody represents, I don't know, the consciousness of a human being.
You got it. Of course, this led to some debatable claims. He linked high pitch to melody, and then drew an analogy between the unfolding of a melody with its tension and release to the ups and downs of human emotions.
But did he think that music actually caused these emotions in us?
No, that's where it gets interesting. He argued that if music simply aroused emotions, it wouldn't be that valuable because for him, those emotions are ultimately rooted in the will, which he saw as the source of suffering.
So if music just made us feel things, it wouldn't be a true escape from the will.
Exactly. Instead, he thought music's power lies in its ability to present the will in its purest form without us having to actually experience its painful urges.
So it's like we get to understand the will without getting caught up in its drama.
Precisely. So for Schopenhauer, music's value is about knowledge. It gives us a unique way of understanding the deepest reality, but without making us suffer.
Deep stuff. And this view of music led him to some pretty strong opinions about what kind of music was good and what wasn't.
Oh yeah, he had some definite preferences. Since his whole system relied on this analogy between music and the will, he wasn't a fan of imitative music. He thought it was too focused on superficial appearances and didn't get to the core of things.
It was missing that connection to the will, that deeper level of meaning.
Exactly. He also wasn't big on music that was dominated by lyrics because he felt that pure instrumental music offered a much more direct and unmediated experience of the will.
He wanted the music to speak for itself, without the interference of words.
And because he saw melody as the most direct representation of the will at a higher level, he wasn't that into music that downplayed melody.
He was a melody man through and through.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now, while not everyone agreed with all of Schopenhauer's ideas, his philosophy had a massive impact on Richard Wagner,
The opera composer.
the one and only. Schopenhauer's ideas really resonated with Wagner and deeply influenced both his musical compositions and his own writings about music and drama.
So Schopenhauer was like Wagner's philosophical muse.
You could say that. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the idealist perspectives of philosophers like Schelling and Hegel.
Okay, idealists. What was their take on music?
Well, they also thought music was incredibly important, but for them, the key was music's existence in time. They argued that this temporal nature was crucial to understanding its unique power.
Okay, so the fact that music unfolds over time, that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, is what made it so special for them.
Exactly. It's all about that temporal dimension.
All right, let's unpack this a bit. First up, Schelling. What were his main ideas?
Well, Schelling saw art as this incredible way for the infinite to express itself in the finite world. He divided art into two main categories: formative and verbal.
Formative and verbal. Got it. What's the difference?
Formative arts, like sculpture and painting, work with physical materials and space. Verbal arts, like poetry and literature, use language to convey meaning.
So where did music fit into all of this?
He actually placed music alongside painting and sculpture as a formative art.
Interesting. That might seem a bit surprising, considering music isn't a physical object in the same way as a sculpture.
Right. But for Schelling, the key was that music, like the other formative arts, creates a structured and unified whole out of its basic elements. He identified three core elements in music: rhythm, modulation, which we'd now usually call harmony and melody.
So rhythm, harmony, and melody, the building blocks of music.
Exactly. And he saw these elements as analogous to different aspects of the formative arts. Rhythm, he believed, was the most fundamentally musical element. He saw modulation as having a painterly quality because of its use of different sonic colors. And he viewed melody as akin to sculpture in its linear form.
I love those comparisons. It really helps to visualize how he saw music as a kind of shaping or forming of sound over time.
Exactly. It's all about that temporal dimension, about how music creates a coherent and meaningful experience through its unfolding in time. He even connected this to how our own consciousness unifies our experience over time.
Well, that's deep. So, for Schelling, music is not just about sounds, it's a reflection of how we experience the world and ourselves through time.
You got it. Now, let's move on to Hegel, who had an even more systematic and comprehensive approach to understanding music. His ideas were part of this massive philosophical system that encompassed everything from metaphysics to history.
Hegel is known for being a big picture thinker, right?
He was. For Hegel, the ultimate reality was this self-determining spiritual principle, often called the idea or spirit. And this spirit, he believed, unfolds through history in these patterns of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
Okay, so this spirit is like the driving force behind everything, and it develops over time through these opposing forces that eventually resolve into something new.
That's a great way to put it. And Hegel believed that art was one of the ways that this spirit expresses its freedom, along with religion and philosophy.
So art, religion, and philosophy are all connected for Hegel.
Absolutely. They're all different ways of expressing the same underlying truth. And for him, beauty itself is the sensuous shining of the idea.
I like that. So beauty is like a glimpse of this ultimate reality, the spirit, made visible through the senses.
Exactly. Now, just as he had these stages in the unfolding of the idea, he also identified stages in the history of art: symbolic, classical, and romantic.
And where did music fit into this grand scheme?
He saw romantic art, which included Christian-influenced art from the Middle Ages onwards, as being all about the expression of absolute inwardness. It's this deep sense of inner freedom that transcends the physical world. And because music completely abandons any reliance on physical space and unfolds solely in time, just like our inner thoughts and emotions, Hegel believed it was the perfect art form for expressing this romantic ideal.
So for Hegel, music was like the ultimate romantic art form.
In a sense, yes. He really dug into the specific elements of music, analyzing things like meter, rhythm, harmony, and melody. He saw melody as the highest form of musical expression because it could give tangible form to the freedom of the spirit by presenting feelings as they naturally unfold over time.
So he's focusing on how music captures the flow of our inner lives, the way our feelings change and develop over time.
Right. He even compared a simple human cry, like a spontaneous expression of emotion, to a musical phrase that could be broken down into notes, harmonized, and developed into a melody.
Interesting. So for Hegel, music is almost like a refined and expanded version of our most basic emotional expressions.
Exactly. Now, he also had a really interesting view on why music is so emotionally powerful.
Okay, I'm all ears. Why did Hegel think music moves us so deeply?
He argued that it's because our very selves, our consciousness and experience are fundamentally structured in time. And because music also exists and unfolds in time, there's this shared medium, this direct connection that allows music to tap into our emotions in such a profound way.
So it's like music is speaking our language, the language of time and feeling.
Precisely. He contrasted this with poetry, where the connection between words and their meaning is more arbitrary. But in music, the feeling, the expressive quality, seems inseparable from the sounds themselves.
It's like the feeling is built right into the music itself.
Exactly. Now, Hegel also distinguished between music that serves as accompaniment, like in a song or opera, and purely instrumental music.
So music with words versus music without words.
Right. He appreciated both, but he thought that instrumental music had the greatest potential to express the inner freedom of the spirit because it wasn't tied to any specific external meaning. But he was also wary of music that became too focused on complex, formal structures and lost its connection to emotional content.
So even though he saw instrumental music as the highest form, he still wanted it to have that emotional depth, that expressive power.
Absolutely. And here's another fascinating thing. He also thought about the role of the performer in music, which is something that a lot of philosophers hadn't really considered before.
What did he have to say about performers?
Well, he said that in music, we actually appreciate the process of creation and interpretation in a way that's different from how we experience, say, a finished painting. He even distinguished between performances that try to stick strictly to the score and those that allow for more personal expression from the performer.
So he's recognizing that there's a whole other layer of meaning that comes from how the music is actually performed, not just from the notes on the page.
Exactly. So the idealists, like Schelling and Hegel, really expanded our understanding of music, showing us how it's deeply connected to our inner lives, our experience of time, and even the unfolding of human consciousness. But then, in the mid to late 19th century, there's this interesting shift towards a more formalist perspective, which emphasized the importance of music structure and form over its expressive qualities.
So it's like a bit of a pendulum swing, going from the emotional depth of romanticism to a more analytical focus on the nuts and bolts of music.
You got it. And a key concept that emerges during this time is absolute music.
Absolute music. What exactly does that mean?
It's a term that was actually first used by Wagner, but he meant it in a negative way. He used it to describe music that he thought lacked a clear purpose, like social or dramatic function.
So like music for music's sake, which he wasn't a big fan of.
Exactly. But then, ironically, Wagner's opponents took that term, absolute music, and embraced it to describe something they thought was incredibly important. Purely instrumental music.
Music without words, without a program, just music itself.
That's it. And this idea of absolute music really set the stage for musical formalism, which argues that the real value of music lies in its formal properties, the notes, the rhythms, the harmonies, and how they're all structured together, rather than in any emotions it might express or evoke.
So the focus shifts from what music makes us feel to how it's actually constructed.
Precisely. And while Kant himself wasn't necessarily a formalist, his ideas were often interpreted that way. And a thinker named Hans-Georg Negeli, influenced by Kant, argued that music doesn't have a specific emotional character. He said it's not about feelings, but about form.
So Negeli was an early champion of this formalist view.
He was. And then there was Johann Friedrich Herbart, who argued that each art form has its own unique nature, and that we should separate the beautiful object from the subjective effects it has on us.
He's basically saying, let's appreciate the artwork for what it is, not just for how it makes us feel.
Exactly. Now, all of these ideas really come together in the work of Edward Hanslick, who is basically the big name in musical formalism. His book on the musically beautiful is like the Formalist Manifesto.
Okay, Hanslick. He was the one who really laid out the whole formalist argument.
He was, and he was very much pushing back against that romantic idea that music's primary purpose was to express emotions.
So he was team form, not team feeling.
Absolutely. And he had some really interesting arguments against the aesthetics of feeling, as he called it.
I'm curious to hear his arguments. What did he say?
Well, he pointed out that when you have purely instrumental music, different people often have totally different interpretations of what emotions it's supposed to express. There's no clear consensus. He even said that a piece of music could be perceived as joyful or sad depending on the words that are set to it.
So the music itself isn't inherently happy or sad. It's the context that gives it that emotional coloring.
Exactly. He also pointed out that a lot of great music, like Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, doesn't seem to be trying to represent any specific emotion at all.
It's just music beautiful and complex in its own right.
Exactly. And then he had this argument based on disagreement among music critics. He said that critics might agree on whether a piece of music is good, but they often completely disagree about what emotions it's supposed to convey.
If music is really about expressing emotions, shouldn't there be more agreement on what emotions are being expressed?
That was his point. But maybe his most influential argument was what's called the conceptual content argument. He said that real emotions aren't just raw feelings. They involve concepts and ideas. Like, hope requires the concept of a future. Melancholy requires the concept of a past.
Right, emotions are more complex than just a feeling in the moment.
Exactly. And he argued that music, being a purely sonic art form, just doesn't have the capacity to deal with those kinds of concepts. So for Hanslick, music can't really express specific emotions.
Okay, so if music isn't about expressing emotions, what is it about,
Right.
according to Hanslick? What did he think was the real point of music?
Well, for him, the true value of music was purely musical. He said the real content is simply sonically moved forms, the intricate patterns and structures created by the sounds themselves.
So it's all about the way the sounds are organized, the way they work together in time to create these fascinating forms.
Exactly. And while he acknowledged that music might cause emotional responses in listeners, he said those are just side effects, not the main point.
The music itself, the form, is what matters.
That was his view. And it was definitely a reaction against the more expressive approaches of composers like Wagner and Liszt, who were really pushing boundaries and often trying to connect their music to extra musical ideas, emotions, and narratives.
So Hanslick was like, hold on, let's not forget the beauty and power of music in its purest form.
Exactly. He wanted to defend the legitimacy of absolute music. And his ideas had a huge influence on how people thought about music for a long time. Now, as we move towards the end of the 19th century, we see another really interesting shift, this time towards looking at music through the lens of the life sciences.
So instead of just philosophy and aesthetics, we're bringing biology into the picture.
Exactly, and this shift was very much driven by the work of Charles Darwin,
Darwin, the evolution guy.
the one and only. His theory of evolution by natural and sexual selection provided a whole new way of understanding human behavior and capacities, including our love of music.
Okay, so how did Darwin explain music from an evolutionary perspective?
Well, in his book, The Descent of Man, he suggested that music might have evolved from the vocalizations that animals use during courtship.
So, like, music as a kind of sophisticated mating call.
In a way, yes. He saw music as rooted in these very primal biological urges.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So our love of music might be connected to our ancient drive to find a mate.
That was Darwin's idea. And he also thought this origin might help explain why music often seems to express positive emotions. After all, if music evolved from courtship rituals, it makes sense that it would be linked to feelings of love, joy, and attraction.
It's like music is tapping into those feel-good chemicals in our brains.
Right. But another influential thinker, Herbert Spencer, had a slightly different take on music's origins. He proposed that music developed as a kind of heightened and more organized form of the natural vocal expressions we make when we're feeling strong emotions.
So when we're happy, we might let out a joyful shout. When we're sad, we might sigh or moan. And Spencer thought music was a kind of elaboration on those basic vocal expressions.
Exactly. He saw it as an idealization of the natural language of passion. And he was particularly focused on melody in this context because most emotional vocalizations involve a single melodic line. But it's interesting because even though both Darwin and Spencer were big on evolution, they had different approaches to explaining things.
How so?
Well, Spencer liked to come up with general evolutionary laws, while Darwin was more focused on finding specific evidence for his claims. For instance, Spencer actually criticized Darwin's theory about music and courtship, saying that it didn't fit with his general principles of how evolution works.
So even within the evolutionary camp, there was some debate and disagreement.
Absolutely. Now, there was another thinker, Edmund Gurney, who was also interested in the evolutionary origins of music, but he actually had a much more nuanced view that bridged the formalist ideas and these biological perspectives.
Gurney, okay. Tell me more about him.
He was really fascinating. He was fundamentally a formalist. He believed that music's core value lies in its abstract forms, which he called ideal motion. But he also believed that music could arouse a unique kind of emotion in the listener.
So he was both team form and team feeling.
In a way, yes. He argued that beautiful music creates this intense emotional excitement that's unlike any other emotion we experience. And he even tried to explain this musical emotion in evolutionary terms. He suggested it might be an unconscious association with the powerful feelings our ancestors felt during courtship.
That's fascinating. So he's saying our emotional response to music might be tied to our deep evolutionary past.
Exactly. But he recognized that this explanation didn't quite account for why only beautiful music, with its specific formal properties, evoked this feeling.
Right, because if it was just about primal urges, wouldn't any kind of sound do the trick?
That was his point. Now, Gurney also made this important distinction between impressiveness and expressiveness in music.
Okay, impressiveness versus expressiveness. What's the difference?
For him, impressiveness is music's ability to arouse that specific musical emotion he talked about, the one connected to its beauty and form. And he thought that was the most important thing about music. Expressiveness, on the other hand, is music's ability to arouse more ordinary emotions or suggest extra musical ideas.
So impressiveness is about the music itself, while expressiveness is about how the music makes us feel or what it makes us think of.
Exactly. He saw impressiveness as the primary function of music and expressiveness as a secondary one. So by the end of the 19th century, you have this incredible evolution in how people were thinking about music, from the emotional intensity of Romanticism to the analytical focus on form, and even to attempts to explain music through evolution. And then we get to the 20th century where things get even more diverse and complex.
It's like music philosophy went through its own kind of evolution. So what new ideas were brewing in the 20th century?
Well, one really influential approach was phenomenology, which is all about understanding the world through lived experience.
Okay, phenomenology. What does that have to do with music?
Thinkers like Edmund Husserl had already started to explore the role of music in our consciousness of time. But it was Roman Ingarden who really applied phenomenology to music in a systematic way. He wanted to understand what a musical work is, not just in terms of its notes or its performance, but as a kind of experience.
So he was digging into the very essence of music, how it exists for us as listeners.
Exactly. He argued against these traditional views that saw musical works either as these abstract, ideal objects or simply as their scores. He said they're best understood as intentional objects that exist in this quasi-temporal realm. It's like they're shaped by the composer's intentions and the listener's experience unfolding over time.
So it's not just about the notes on the page or the sounds in the air. It's about the whole experience of music as it unfolds in time for both the creator and the listener.
You got it. And then there was Alfred Schutz, another big name in phenomenology. He was really interested in how music can be deeply meaningful, even though it doesn't have the same kind of clear conceptual content as language.
So, like, we can understand and be moved by music even if we can't necessarily put it into words.
Exactly. He also explored this idea of a mutual tuning in relationship that happens when people make music together. It's that shared experience, that sense of connection. And